Hello? My name is Indira. At a family party meant to celebrate my sister, she hid a pearl necklace in my bag and called the cops. My parents believed her. That night, I wasn't just humiliated. I was erased, accused, and paraded as a thief in my own family's home. But what they didn't know was that I had been quietly collecting every slight, every betrayal. I had stopped being afraid of my silence. And when the truth came out, it didn't just clear my name. It shattered everything they thought they could control. Do you want to know how it all unraveled? I was at the design studio, wrapping up a sketch for a client, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a text from my mother. "Don't forget Callista's birthday party tomorrow. Starts at 4. We're expecting you." Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours' notice. I stared at the message, the pen frozen between my fingers. It wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, I couldn't recall the last time I had been invited to anything in my family with more than a day's warning. Sometimes it was hours. Other times, no invitation at all. Just photos later on social media, my sister smiling with everyone around her while I was left to scroll in silence. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the studio press against me. My first instinct was to delete the message, to let it slip by like so many times before. But the thought of my mother's disappointed sigh, or worse, her thin-lipped silence, weighed on me. Refusing to show up would only prove whatever story Callista had been weaving about me. That I was detached, selfish, ungrateful. So I typed back, "I'll be there." And just like that, I was locked into another night of being invisible in my own family. The next afternoon, the air in Austin was soft with early spring warmth. I parked a few houses down from my parents' home, gripping the modestly wrapped box in my lap. A silk scarf I had found at a boutique, understated, elegant. I knew Callista preferred designer labels, but it was what I could afford. When I walked up the front steps, the house was already buzzing. Laughter spilled out from the open windows, and the scent of catered food floated in the air. As I stepped inside, no one turned. They were all too busy hovering around Callista, who stood radiant in the living room, her dress shimmering under the chandelier. She caught sight of me but didn't move. Instead, she tilted her head, whispered something to the cousin beside her, and the two of them laughed. A young server in a crisp white shirt approached me. "Hi, ma'am. Your seat's just over there." He gestured toward the far corner of the room. I followed his direction, my heels clicking against the hardwood, and found myself at a small, round table tucked near the restroom. The hum of the toilet flushing carried every few minutes. My chair wobbled slightly as I sat. At the center of the room, Callista's table gleamed with polished silverware and floral arrangements. She sat surrounded by friends, her laughter ringing louder than the rest. Our mother, Helene, was right beside her, glowing as though Callista's joy was her own. She glanced my way once, raised a hand in a polite half-wave, then turned back without getting up. I set the gift on the table beside me. It looked pitiful against the pile of designer boxes stacked near Callista's chair. No ribbons, no embossed logos, just my simple paper wrapping. I swallowed the knot forming in my throat. I tried to distract myself by observing. The relatives swapped stories, sipping wine that seemed to refill endlessly. Old memories were retold. Callista's prom night, Callista's internship in New York, Callista's flawless wedding. I could predict each punchline before it landed, because I had heard these stories 100 times. Only I was never in them. For a moment, my mind drifted backward, uninvited. I saw myself as a little girl, sitting on the edge of my bed while Callista twirled in a new dress, Mom clapping as if she'd discovered a star. Dad would glance over his newspaper long enough to murmur, "That's my girl," before retreating back behind the pages. My girl? Never directed at me. When I brought home perfect grades, the response was practical. "Good, that's expected." But when Callista managed a B-, it was celebrated with ice cream. "She needs the encouragement," Mom used to say. "You're the strong one, Indira. You don't need the spotlight." I had learned early how to cry silently, pressed into closets, under blankets, muffling the sound with pillows, always in secret, always careful not to disturb the house that only had room for one shining daughter. A wave of laughter snapped me back to the present. I sipped from my water glass, watching Callista lean close to one of her friends, whispering with exaggerated gestures. Their eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away. My gift still sat unopened, pushed slightly to the side as though forgotten. I stared at it, willing someone, anyone, to pick it up, to acknowledge that it was mine. But the box might as well have been invisible, just like me. The party carried on without pause. The staff refilled wine glasses, the playlist shifted to upbeat jazz, and more relatives drifted through the door. A few greeted me politely, but none lingered. I remained at my corner table, the flush of the restroom behind me marking the rhythm of the night. Then something caught my attention. Callista leaned toward a waiter, whispering something that made his eyebrows lift. He nodded quickly, then cast a glance in my direction before walking off. A prickle rose along my skin. When I looked back, Callista was watching me. Her smile was wide, bright, almost too sweet, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. And in that moment, I knew something was coming. Link to next chapter. Callista caught my eye from across the room. Her smile held something I couldn't name yet, but I knew better than to trust it. Callista caught my eye from across the room. Her smile held something I couldn't name yet, but I knew better than to trust it. A server passed between us carrying trays of champagne flutes, breaking our stare, and I realized the evening had shifted into the gift-giving portion of the party. Everyone gathered closer to the center table, chairs scraping, voices rising in anticipation. It was Callista's moment, the part she loved most, where admiration poured in, box by glittering box. I stayed in my corner, clutching my small, carefully wrapped present. It wasn't even for her. It was for my mother. I had spent nights sketching the family home, layering details until the drawing felt alive. Then framing it in wood, I sanded myself. It wasn't expensive, but it carried something no price tag could. The first gifts were lavish, a pair of diamond earrings from an aunt, a spa package from a cousin who winked and said, "Every queen needs a retreat," a designer handbag from family friends. Each time Callista peeled back paper or lifted a ribbon, the crowd oohed and awed on cue. When my turn finally came, I stepped forward, holding the frame carefully. My heart thudded against my ribs. "This one's for Mom," I said, offering it to Helene. For a second, her expression softened, a flicker of surprise, maybe even gratitude. But before she could say anything, Callista leaned in. "Oh, how quaint," she drawled, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry across the room. "Did you make that during your lunch break?" The room laughed. Not a belly laugh, not cruel exactly, but the kind of chuckle people give when they don't want to be left out of the joke. My cheeks burned. Helene glanced at me, then quickly smoothed her hand over the frame and murmured, "Thank you, darling. It's thoughtful." She set it aside next to the unopened designer boxes. I forced a smile, even managed to nod. Inside, my chest ached like someone had pressed a fist against my sternum. I slipped back to my seat near the restroom. The clinking of silverware began as dinner was served, waiters weaving through the tables with plates of steak and roasted vegetables. I tried to focus on my food, but a tap on my shoulder startled me. "Excuse me," a distant cousin said, holding out her glass. "Could I get more water?" For a moment, I didn't understand. Then I realized. She thought I was staff. I sat at the corner, in a plain navy dress, no jewelry glinting under the lights, and from her angle, I must have looked like I belonged to the servers. Before I could answer, Helene interjected, "She's not staff, honey, she's family." Her tone was light, almost amused. Funny mistake. She didn't say my name. She didn't add warmth, just brushed it off as though the confusion was inevitable. The cousin's cheeks colored. "Oh, sorry about that." She turned back to her plate, already laughing with the person beside her. I sat frozen, invisible again, not daughter, not sister, just a shadow blending into the wallpaper. My fork hovered above the plate, untouched. I pressed my hands into my lap, nails digging crescents into my skin. The conversation flowed without me, wine glasses clinked, laughter rose. My silence was easier for everyone. And then the memories came. Uninvited. Prom night. Callista had tried on dress after dress while Mom circled her like a stylist, adjusting straps, holding pins, gushing over every shimmer of fabric. I had waited until the last minute, slipping into a borrowed gown from a friend. At the photo session, relatives fawned over Callista. Someone had introduced me as Callista's sister. Not Indira. Never Indira. That label had followed me through every milestone. Her sister, never my own name. The bitterness tasted metallic in my mouth. My fists tightened under the table. I wanted to stand, to shout, to shake them and demand they see me. But I stayed still. I'd learned long ago that outbursts only confirmed what Callista whispered, that I was dramatic, unstable, hard to love. Instead, I watched, observed, took inventory of every slight, every chuckle at my expense. My silence became a ledger, each insult a mark in ink. Callista's voice rang above the din. She held her wine glass high, her other hand brushing the pearl necklace at her throat. The pearls gleamed against her skin, milky and perfect. "Some things," she said with a deliberate pause, "are priceless. Not everyone can afford them." Her friends laughed knowingly. Heat rushed up my neck. I stared at my plate, willing the tears not to come. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. She held the necklace like it was a crown, and in that moment, I didn't realize it would soon become the noose she tied around my neck. She held the necklace like it was a crown, and in that moment, I didn't realize it would soon become the noose she tied around my neck. The thought barely faded before the evening took its sharp turn. Dessert plates had just been set down. Slices of lemon cake glowing under the soft chandelier light, spoons clinking faintly against porcelain. Conversations swelled and overlapped, the room a haze of wine and laughter. Then came the gasp. It was sharp, theatrical, slicing through the chatter like a glass shattering on tile. Every head turned. Callista's hands shot to her bare throat, her face twisted with horror. "My necklace!" she cried, her voice trembling yet perfectly loud enough to command the room. "It's gone!" Gasps rippled across the tables. Chairs scraped as people stood. A few rushed to her side, hands fluttering helplessly as if they could summon pearls out of thin air. Helene wrapped her arms around Callista, rocking her slightly. "Sweetheart, don't panic. We'll find it. Don't you worry." Her voice was urgent, maternal, the kind of comfort I hadn't felt from her in years. I blinked, confused. I had seen the necklace only minutes earlier, those pearls gleaming against Callista's collarbone as she flaunted them like royalty. How could it be gone now? The search began immediately. Guests crouched under tables, peered behind chairs, even checked the corners of the polished hardwood floor. Waiters scurried nervously, lifting tablecloths, scanning every inch. The sound of shifting silverware and murmured guesses filled the air. I rose from my seat, trying to help, but as I moved, I felt eyes turning my way. A quiet current, unspoken but palpable, seemed to sweep the room. And then, Callista spoke again, her voice just low enough to sound confidential, just loud enough to carry. "Maybe someone jealous took it." She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, letting her words hang like smoke. Several relatives glanced in my direction. Their eyes flicked quickly away, but the damage was done. My skin prickled. I forced myself to kneel near a table leg, pretending to search, my fingers brushing along smooth wood, though I knew I wouldn't find anything. Then came the strike. "I saw Indira near my bag earlier," Callista declared suddenly, pointing across the room, her hand trembling, her voice dripping with wounded innocence. "She's always been jealous. Maybe she thought she deserved it." My breath caught in my throat. The room fell silent, except for the faint clatter of a spoon hitting the floor. "No," I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. I hadn't gone near her bag. I hadn't touched anything of hers. Helene's face tightened, brows drawn, lips pressed thin. Thaddeus shifted in his chair, staring at his lap, avoiding me completely. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between us. Someone, I couldn't tell who, said, "Well, if there's nothing to hide, let's just check her purse." A murmur of agreement followed. The crowd had found its rhythm again, one that pushed me to the center. I began, my voice trembling. But already, someone reached for the small black bag resting against the leg of my chair. I clutched it instinctively, shaking my head. No, that's mine. If you're innocent, you have nothing to worry about, another relative said firmly, their tone carrying the kind of false reason people use to mask judgment. Hands pried the purse from my grip. My protests were drowned in the collective eagerness for resolution. The clasp clicked open. Silence fell heavy. A hand reached inside, rustled through. Then, with a triumphant flourish, they pulled it out. The pearl necklace. Its milky gleam mocked me under the chandelier light. Gasps erupted. A few people muttered under their breath. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Another shook her head, muttering, "I can't believe it." My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the chair to stay upright. "That's not mine," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign to me, faint and brittle. "I didn't put that there." Helene's eyes brimmed with tears, though none of them fell for me. "How could you, Indira?" she murmured, voice breaking with devastation. Thaddeus exhaled slowly, his head shaking side to side, as though I had confirmed some long-held suspicion he hadn't dared voice aloud. "I didn't." My words fractured. They dissolved into the air, unheard. Meanwhile, Callista collapsed dramatically into Helene's arms, her sobs echoing against the walls. "Why would she do this to me?" she wailed. "On my birthday, after everything." The relatives circled tighter, whispers rising. Jealousy. Embarrassing. Unbelievable. Their words sliced through me, sharp and cold. I stood frozen, a statue in the corner of my parents' home, shame wrapping itself around me like chains. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, Callista's voice cut through the whispers with 4 words that shattered me completely. "I'm calling the police." Her words cut through me. "I'm calling the police." Before I could gather myself, before I could even plead, Callista had her phone in hand, dialing with the kind of deliberate drama she'd perfected since childhood. The entire room froze, every conversation silenced. All you could hear was the soft, tinny buzz of the dialing tone. "Hello, yes," she said loudly, tears dripping down her cheeks, as though the officer on the other end could see her performance. "This is Callista Warner. I'm at my parents' home. My pearl necklace has been stolen." Her voice broke on the last word, theatric and precise. "Yes, I think I know who took it." Gasps fluttered like wings through the room. I felt my knees weaken. "Mom," I whispered, turning to Helene. "Please, tell her to stop. You know I didn't." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes, glossy with something I couldn't name, slid away from mine. I turned to Thaddeus. My father rubbed his forehead, the gesture of a man too tired to interfere. "Just let them handle it," he muttered. "The police will sort it out." My chest hollowed. They were choosing silence over me. Again. The room grew unbearably still, only punctuated by Callista's sobs and the muffled voices from her phone. Every so often someone glanced at me, their eyes sliding quickly away, ashamed of their curiosity, yet unable to resist. I stood there, surrounded by relatives and strangers, more exposed than I had ever been in my life. I caught snippets of whispers. "She's always been the odd one. Doesn't she struggle with money?" I heard she never really fit in. The words stung more than any slap could. My plain dress, my modest life, everything I had tried to own with dignity was now ammunition. I wasn't Indira anymore. I was a headline waiting to happen. Minutes crawled. Each second stretched unbearably as we waited for the inevitable knock. My hands trembled against my sides, but I held them still, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Then it came. 3 firm raps on the front door. The chatter died instantly. The sound of footsteps approached, not mine, not Callista's, but one of the uncles hurrying to open it. The door swung wide, letting in the crisp Texas night air. A uniformed officer stepped inside, tall and steady, his expression unreadable, but commanding the room at once. "Good evening," he said, his tone calm, yet edged with authority. "We received a report of a theft." All eyes turned to Callista, who immediately melted against Helene's shoulder. "Officer," she sobbed, pointing at her bare collarbone. "My necklace! It was worth so much, and it just disappeared." She hiccuped convincingly, her shoulders trembling. "I know who took it. I saw her." Every head swung toward me. The officer studied me for a moment, then asked in a measured voice, "Ma'am, would you allow me to see your purse again?" My throat tightened. "It's already been checked," I said softly, hating the quiver in my voice. "And you know what they found." "That's why I need to look again," he replied evenly. No accusation, no warmth either, just procedure. I nodded, my fingers cold as I lifted the small black bag and placed it in his hands. He opened it with care, scanning the contents quickly, then held up the pearls. The gasp in the room echoed louder than before, though the sight wasn't new. The verdict was already written. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside with me," he said, his tone gentle but firm. The words struck me like a hammer. My legs felt heavy, unwilling to move, yet somehow I pushed myself upright. As I walked, the crowd parted down the middle, creating a narrow path. People leaned back, as though I carried something contagious. Helene's eyes darted away when I tried to meet them. Thaddeus rubbed his temple, refusing to look at me at all. The humiliation seared hotter than fire. Each step toward the open door felt like a public flogging. And then came the flash. The glow of cell phones lifted discreetly, snapping photos, recording video. I heard a murmur, "This is unbelievable. She's ruined herself." When I reached the doorframe, the night air hit me like a slap, cool and merciless. Behind me, the murmur of voices swelled again, but this time it was Callista's sobs rising above them all, painting her as the wounded princess in a story where I was the thief. The door closed behind me with a soft but final thud. The officer gestured toward the steps. I sank down on the top one, hugging my arms around myself, staring into the darkness of the quiet street. My voice cracked as I whispered, barely audible even to myself. "Even my parents think I'm guilty." And in that moment, the last thread tying me to them snapped. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying every moment, and realized that silence had never protected me. It had only buried me. The days that followed were heavy and slow, each one weighed down with shame. My apartment in East Austin had never felt so small. The blinds stayed half closed, shutting out the Texas sun. The hum of traffic on the street below carried on, indifferent to the ruin of my name. I moved from bed to sofa to kitchen table, but every corner of the place seemed to echo with the same memory. Callista's cry, the gasps, the necklace shining in my bag like a brand burned onto my skin. My phone buzzed constantly at first. Messages poured in, aunts asking for explanations, cousins offering backhanded advice, neighbors forwarding me blurry videos from the party that had already made their way online. I stopped reading after the first dozen. Mom's texts were the worst. "Don't make this worse. Please stay quiet, Indira. Your father can't handle more embarrassment." Not one word of defense, not a single acknowledgement that I might be innocent. I deleted them all without replying. By the fourth day, the calls slowed. By the fifth, silence. My family had shut the door, and this time I didn't try to wedge my foot in. And I blocked their numbers, shut down group threads, cut off every fragile string that tied me to them. I told myself I needed peace, but peace never came. At work, whispers carried further than they should. I could feel the glances whenever I walked into the office kitchen. Someone left an anonymous note on my desk. "Thief." My boss didn't mention it, but the way he avoided eye contact told me he'd seen the videos too. I started keeping a journal. At first it was just scraps, words, fragments, broken sentences scrawled late at night when sleep refused me. Then the pages began to grow thicker with detail. I wrote down every slight I could remember. Every birthday I wasn't invited to, every time my parents chose Callista's comfort over my dignity, every small humiliation I had swallowed for the sake of peace. It was either right or collapse. One evening, after a week of silence, I sat curled on the couch with that journal in my lap. The air felt heavy, pressing against me. The clock ticked past midnight. I thought about how my life had shrunk into this. 4 walls, half-drawn blinds, the sound of my own breath. Then my laptop pinged. At first I ignored it, but the notification wouldn't leave. I finally dragged myself across the room and opened it. A message glowed on Facebook, the kind of unexpected thing that makes you blink twice. Indira, it's Blaine, from law school. I saw what happened. Do you need someone in your corner? Blaine. It took me a moment to place him. We'd been in the same study group during my first year, before I left law school. He had been sharp, ambitious, but also kind. The kind who carried extra snacks for anyone too tired to leave the library. We hadn't spoken in years. My first instinct was suspicion. Why now? But then I reread his words. In your corner. They felt different from the pity or judgment in everyone else's eyes. I typed back slowly. I don't know what anyone could do, but thank you. His reply came almost instantly. Can I stop by tomorrow, just to listen? For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. A flicker, fragile and hesitant, but real. The next evening, Blaine showed up at my apartment with a bag of takeout and the same steady smile I remembered. He didn't push, didn't prod. He just sat across from me, listening while I stumbled through half-finished sentences. I feel erased, I admitted finally, my voice shaking, like I never had a name of my own, always Callista's sister, always the scapegoat, and now… I gestured helplessly. Blaine leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. You don't need to scream to be heard, he said quietly. You just need the right moment, the right proof. Silence doesn't mean weakness, it can mean patience. His words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. I thought about the journal sitting on my desk, pages filled with memories I had tried to bury. Maybe silence hadn't been useless. Maybe it had been storage, a way of collecting what I needed without even realizing it. After Blaine left, I sat by that journal for a long time. I traced the spine with my fingertips, imagining it as more than paper. It was a record, evidence, years of wounds waiting for daylight. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of my silence. I was preparing to use it. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of my silence. I was preparing to use it. When Sunday morning arrived, the sky over Austin was crisp and clear, as though nothing heavy had happened. Yet inside me, everything felt charged. 2 weeks had passed since I shut the door on my parents' home, but the wound had never stopped throbbing. The invitation to the charity brunch came via a carefully worded email from Helene that morning. We expect your presence. It's for the family's reputation. I stared at that message, my heart dragging at the weight of the words. Reputation. As though I still cared. The shame, the betrayal, the stares at the party. I'd swallowed them all, but they hadn't died. How could they? My reflection in the mirror each morning reminded me. Blaine sat across from me at my small kitchen table, a mug of coffee growing cold in his hands. His face was open, patient, not pitying, not pressured. You don't have to do it, he said, voice low. But if you're going, go as observer. My fingers clenched around the rim of my mug. I nodded. I want to see how she spins it. The drive to the country club was quiet, save for the hum of tires over asphalt. When I stepped through those manicured gates, I felt every eye brush over me as though I was a rumor walking. The clubhouse gleamed in the morning sun, white columns and dark wood panels, and guests greeted one another with polite smiles and sparkling glasses of orange juice. I could see Seraphine already in motion, her hair, soft curls bouncing, pearls catching the light, laughter slipping from her lips like silk. She moved among the guests, leaning in to exchange compliments, her voice warm but carrying sting. At one point, she placed a hand on her collarbone, touching the necklace she'd later claimed to have lost. A small gesture loaded with meaning. She stood at the podium as brunch began, raising a toast to family, community, and forgiveness. She spoke of healing, of moving forward from misunderstandings. The crowd nodded, applauded. I sat through it, my pulse tight. Each word from her was a weapon, butter wrapped in honey. And everyone believed the honey. I felt an ache in my chest. The room buzzed with whispers. She's handled it gracefully. Family should stick together. She's too good. Those words stung because they were turned against me. I rose from my seat, stepping toward her. The room paused. Her eyes flicked to mine. I cleared my throat. Funny how you forgot to mention that pawn shop receipt with your name on it, I said. Silence swallowed us. Cutlery hovered. Glasses frozen mid-air. A single fork clinked on a plate somewhere beyond. Seraphine blinked, then forced a laugh so sudden it fractured her composure. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The toast halted. The sound of breathing filled the room. "Pardon?" she asked, voice sharp. I held my ground. "Yes, the pawn shop receipt, the one with your signature. Funny, isn't it, that no one mentioned it?" She reddened, her lips forming a thin smile. She nodded, pretending composure, though her eyes flicked sideways. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the applause trickled in, reluctant, cautious. It felt like praise, but I knew better. She'd cornered me into the frame, but I'd thrown a stone. When the brunch ended, I slipped out before dessert, letting conversation swirl behind me. The stares followed me as I walked through the terrace doors. Blaine found me by the fountain outside, the sun low behind clouds. He gave me a small nod, offering a nonverbal congratulations. That was the first punch. Now she'll come harder. I nodded. My legs felt steady, my breath determined. I knew Seraphine wouldn't stop, but neither would I. I knew Seraphine wouldn't stop, but neither would I. That realization stayed with me like a low drumbeat all week. When the family dinner invitation arrived in my inbox with the subject line, "Reconciliation," I could almost taste the trap. The message was curt and formal, signed by my father, but clearly written by Helene. It invited me to the family estate for a private meal to discuss misunderstandings. By Thursday evening, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. My stomach turned. Blaine stood by the window, arms crossed, watching me quietly. "You don't owe them another chance," he said. "I know," I murmured, my eyes still on the email. "But if I don't go, she'll spin that too. Indira's too proud to reconcile." He tilted his head. "Then go. But go prepared." I closed my laptop. I already am. Sunday evening came wrapped in the heavy scent of blooming wisteria along the estate's driveway. The family home glowed warm through its tall windows, but I knew warmth here was a costume. I parked near the edge of the long gravel path, my pulse steady, and walked up the stone steps. Inside, the air was heavy with roasted meat and polished wood. Relatives milled in the living room, clutching wine glasses, their voices pitched low. When I entered, their conversations stumbled to a halt, then resumed with forced brightness. Helene greeted me with a thin smile, touching my arm, but not really meeting my eyes. Thaddeus stayed seated, his hands clasped, a glass of bourbon resting untouched in front of him. Seraphine stood at the center of it all, luminous as ever. She wore a silk dress the color of champagne, her hair a cascade of soft curls. When she looked at me, her lips curved upward, but her eyes remained cold. We sat at a long mahogany table set for 12. Silverware gleamed under the chandelier. I took the seat furthest from the head of the table, Blaine's words echoing. "Observe." Dinner began with small talk, how the garden had recovered from the frost, how a cousin's child had made honor roll, but beneath it all, the tension pulsed. My fork scraped softly against the plate, the sound unnerving me. Halfway through the main course, Seraphine set down her wine glass and cleared her throat. "Before we move on to dessert," she said sweetly, "there's something I think we should address." Helene glanced at her nervously, but said nothing. Seraphine reached into her purse and produced a stack of printed emails, folded neatly. "I didn't want to bring this up," she began, eyes flicking around the table as though she regretted the necessity. "But for the sake of clarity," she unfolded the pages and slid them toward my parents. "These are messages Indira sent me, begging for money, threatening to expose me if I didn't help her." A collective inhale circled the table. Helene's shoulders slumped. Thaddeus rubbed his temple, eyes squeezed shut. Indira, he murmured. How could you? I reached for the papers calmly. My fingers didn't shake. I skimmed the printouts quickly, noting the dates, the headers, the email address at the top. My old Gmail account, the one I had shut down 3 years ago. I set the pages back down, my face unreadable. That's interesting, I said softly, because this account hasn't existed since 2019, so unless I've mastered time travel, I couldn't have sent these. The room stilled. Narina, a cousin who had always hovered between neutrality and sympathy, whispered, She's right. That address bounced when I tried emailing her last Christmas. Helene blinked. Is that true? I folded my hands in my lap. If you'd like proof, I brought some. I reached into my bag and produced a small USB drive, placing it gently on the table like a piece of evidence in court. Blaine helped me get digital forensics. The logins to this account after it was deactivated came from Seraphine's device, her phone, her IP address. Gasps broke out around the table. One uncle muttered something under his breath. Another cousin leaned forward to see the drive more clearly. Seraphine's cheeks flushed crimson. She laughed, high and brittle. This is ridiculous, she snapped. She's framing me now. I cut her off, my voice still calm but sharpened. No, you've been framing me. This stops tonight. For a moment, only the faint hum of the chandelier filled the silence. Then Seraphine slammed her palm on the table, silverware rattling. She's ruining everything, she shouted, her composure cracking for the first time. She was always the mistake child. The words hung heavy, dripping with venom. Helene's face drained of color. Seraphine, she whispered. Enough. Thaddeus sat rigid, his hand still over his temple, but his eyes finally lifted to me, then to Seraphine. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. I stayed seated, my voice even. All I ever wanted was fairness. You brought me here to humiliate me again, but tonight it's different. Tonight I came with truth. Around the table, whispers rose, relatives shifting, glancing at one another, alliances beginning to slide. Narina crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Seraphine with something close to disgust. Seraphine's chest heaved. She looked at me not with triumph but with something I hadn't seen before, fear flickering behind her fury. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, and I knew the final blow was near. Fear had flickered in Seraphine's eyes at the dinner table, and that image lived inside me like a hidden ember. Over the next 2 weeks, I turned it over and over, feeding it with quiet preparation. When Helene sent another invitation, this time to the grand family reunion at the estate, I knew this would be the stage Seraphine had been waiting for. I dressed simply but deliberately that evening. No more muted tones that let me fade into the wallpaper. A navy wrap dress, clean lines, my hair pulled back neatly. My hands trembled slightly as I tied the last knot of the sash, but my heart felt strangely steady. Blaine had texted just before I left. Remember, you're not walking into a trap anymore. You're walking into your proof. The drive out to the estate was bathed in golden hour light. Oak trees threw long shadows across the road. I slowed down, giving myself time to breathe. In the passenger seat lay a slim leather folder, the culmination of weeks of patient digging and quiet strategy. Cars lined the gravel driveway when I arrived. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled from the open doors. This wasn't just a family dinner, it was a spectacle. More than 50 relatives, family friends, neighbors. I could almost hear Seraphine rehearsing her performance. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and roasted lamb. A string quartet played softly near the foyer, the kind of touch Seraphine loved. People glanced at me as I walked through the grand hall, conversations dropping and then resuming with a brittle edge. Whispers rose like steam. The necklace, the dinner, the rumors. I found a spot near the back of the ballroom, away from the head table. My parents sat up front, Helene in a pale blue dress, Thaddeus stiff in his suit, his face drawn. They didn't wave. We endured an hour of polite small talk, introductions, toasts to absent relatives. Seraphine floated between groups like a queen at court, her laughter bright, her hand resting on shoulders, whispering into ears. I could tell from the glances thrown my way that her narrative had been seeded already. As the sun dipped lower, the event shifted to speeches. A long table was cleared for desserts, champagne flutes distributed. When the host finished a toast to family unity, Seraphine stood up, glass in hand, her voice carried, soft yet commanding. "Before we close the evening," she began, "I need to speak my truth. This isn't easy for me." She paused, eyes glistening, scanning the room. "But family trust has been broken, not just jewelry stolen, our faith, our love." A murmur moved through the crowd. She reached into her bag and withdrew glossy printouts, holding them high like trophies. "I didn't want to do this, but you all deserve to know." She handed the sheets to the nearest uncle. They passed down the line. From where I stood, I could see enough to recognize the format. Fake text threads, my name at the top, words I'd never written. Phrases like, "I'll ruin you if you don't pay me," and "I deserve everything you have." It was a soap opera script, and she was performing it to perfection. I didn't move. I let the crowd absorb it, let them gasp and whisper. Helene's hand flew to her mouth. Thaddeus's jaw clenched. I waited until the papers had made a full circle and landed on the table again. Then I stood. My voice carried without effort. "Are you finished?" Seraphine blinked, thrown off for a moment. "Excuse me?" "Are you finished with your performance?" I asked calmly. She tilted her head, smiling, but her knuckles whitened around the papers. "This isn't a performance. This is me finally exposing you." I took a step forward, the room parting slightly. "No," I said. "This is you trying one last time to bury me with lies." A ripple of tension swept across the hall. Seraphine laughed, brittle. "Oh, please. Everyone knows what you've done." I stopped at the center of the room, directly under the chandelier's glow. "Everyone knows what you've told them," I corrected. "Now let me show them what you've done." From my bag, I drew out the leather folder and opened it slowly. Blaine had called it the mic drop moment. Inside were 2 USB drives and a stack of notarized affidavits. I held one up. "These," I said evenly, "are video files from the pawn shop downtown. Security footage, time-stamped and verified." I turned to the big screen the estate used for family slideshows. "Could someone connect this?" I asked. My cousin Narina, eyes alight, jumped up and helped plug the drive into the projector. The screen flickered to life. At first just grainy footage of a counter, then the image sharpened. Seraphine at the pawn shop, sliding the pearl necklace across the glass, her signature on the receipt. Another clip. The bracelet she had claimed to inherit from Helene. The timestamps matched the days she'd accused me of theft. A collective gasp rose like a wave. Chairs scraped. Someone whispered, "My God." I kept my voice steady. "I didn't steal anything. She did, and she's been framing me for months, years. Every slight, every rumor, every fake message. I stayed silent because I thought silence would protect me." I looked directly at Seraphine. "It didn't. It only gave you room to grow bolder." She stood frozen, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Then she snapped, the mask shattering. "You all wanted her to win!" she screamed, the glossy papers shaking in her fists. "You always pit us against each other. She's not some innocent victim. She's been plotting this." Helene covered her face and began to sob. Thaddeus slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Enough," he barked. "We raised a liar." Seraphine's eyes darted around the room, seeking an ally, finding none. Relatives turned away, some murmuring, some glaring. The quartet had stopped playing. The only music now was the sound of her unraveling. She threw the papers down, her voice breaking into a ragged cry. "You're all hypocrites! You loved her more than me!" No one moved. Finally, she stormed toward the exit, her heels striking the marble floor in sharp staccato. The grand doors slammed behind her, leaving only the echo and a stunned silence. I exhaled slowly. My knees wanted to buckle, but I stayed upright. I hadn't come here to gloat. I had come to reclaim my dignity. Helene rose unsteadily, eyes wet. "Indira," she whispered, but I held up a hand. "Not tonight," I said softly. "Tonight isn't about apologies. It's about truth." The hall stayed quiet. For the first time, no one whispered about me. They whispered about Seraphine. The war was over. but the wounds it left would take a lifetime to heal. The war was over, but like all wars, it left wounds that would not heal quickly, scars that would throb in silence long after the battles themselves had ended. The morning after the reunion, when I finally walked back into my downtown Austin apartment, the sunlight that filtered through the blinds felt strange, not harsh, not punishing, gentler, almost tender, as if the world itself recognized I had survived something brutal. I set my bag down slowly, as if afraid the ordinary motion might break the fragile stillness. On the small kitchen table, I placed the folder of evidence I had carried like a shield. Even now, just seeing it made my heart pound with the memory of last night's confrontation. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The rumble of buses, the laughter of children in the park below, the clink of cups from the cafe across the street. Life was steady, indifferent. Yet inside me, nothing felt the same. I tried slipping back into routine. Mornings at the cafe where I worked part-time, pouring lattes for regulars, sweeping crumbs from tables. Evenings teaching a design class at the community college, lecturing about balance and texture in interior spaces. People looked at me differently now. Some offered smiles that lingered, eyes shining with a kind of admiration. "You stood up for yourself," one whispered as I passed. Others lowered their voices just enough for me to hear anyway. "She had guts." Their praise felt awkward, but real. For so long, my name had only been mentioned in whispers of dismissal or pity. Now, to hear it spoken with respect, it was strange, almost foreign. But when the crowds disappeared, when the nights were quiet, and the apartment hummed with nothing but the refrigerator, loneliness settled in. Seraphine was gone, cast out by her own arrogance, yet the empty seat at the family table remained mine. My name might have been cleared, but my family bonds were still fractured. Thin threads stretched to breaking. 2 days later, news began to ripple through the community. Word spread that Seraphine had been quietly divested of financial support. Distant cousins who once showered her with praise began withdrawing their backing. Sponsors she had bragged about stopped returning her calls. Screenshots of email threads reached me through mutual acquaintances, polite refusals, unanswered messages, a sudden, deliberate silence where once there had been applause. At a small event I attended downtown, a woman raised a glass and toasted me, to courage and truth. Applause followed, warm and earnest. I nodded in thanks, but a part of me wondered, were they celebrating me or simply repudiating her? Praise and spite often travel hand in hand. That week, Helene's messages began appearing on my phone. Her words were hesitant, tentative, like someone testing icy waters with a bare toe. "I'm sorry for being silent too long. I miss you." I thought keeping peace was better, but I see now. I read them all. My thumb hovered more than once over the reply button, but my heart was not ready. Forgiveness cannot be rushed. On a Sunday afternoon, when the air was warm with spring and the sky impossibly blue, I found myself driving out to the family estate. The route was familiar, the oak trees arching overhead, the gravel road crunching under tires, the wrought iron gate opening at my approach. As I pulled into the path, memories rushed back, birthday parties, summer laughter, the weight of whispered judgments in hallways that smelled faintly of lemon polish and roses. Helene stood on the porch when I arrived. She looked smaller somehow, her usual poise softened by grief. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red as though she had been crying for days. She placed a trembling hand against the wooden frame of the door. "Indira," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for coming." I stopped at the threshold. Inside, the rooms looked exactly as I remembered them, furniture perfectly arranged, silver gleaming on the sideboard, yet the air felt hollow, as if the soul of the house had been stripped away. She led me into the parlor. Thaddeus sat stiffly in an armchair, his shoulders hunched, his face older than I remembered. His eyes met mine briefly, then fell. The man who once seemed indestructible now looked worn, as if the cost of denial had finally caught up with him. Helene's voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting Callista. I thought defending her would keep the family safe. But I was wrong. I failed you." Tears streaked down her cheeks as she extended her arms toward me, but I didn't move to embrace her. "I heard everything," I said softly. I know you believed in her, but I came here to speak my side." Thaddeus rose slowly, his voice gravelly. "Indira, I was wrong to doubt you. It took me too long to see her for who she really is." His admission landed heavily. I felt the sting of years pressing into me. "I'm not here to erase what happened," I said. "I'm here to make sure it never happens again." Helene sobbed quietly. Thaddeus nodded, his gaze lowered. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything unsaid. I stayed only until sunset. As the light slanted through tall windows, I wandered through the dining room one last time. The long table gleamed under its chandelier, polished wood that had hosted countless meals. I saw in my mind the faces that once sat there, laughter spilling into the air, my own silence tucked neatly into the margins. I paused by the head chair, fingertips brushing the carved wood. Once I had longed to belong there. Now I understood I never truly had. Outside, I turned back for a final look. The estate was still beautiful, its walls proud and elegant, but to me, it had become a mausoleum, a witness to betrayal more than a home. I walked away, gravel crunching under my shoes, the oaks whispering in the evening breeze. Back in my apartment, the night stretched long and quiet. I pulled the framed sketch from its hiding place, the one I had drawn years ago of the family home. The lines were delicate, the facade flawless. I traced them with my fingertip, and for the first time, I didn't ache to live inside those walls. The house was no longer my sanctuary. My truth was, the scars remained, yes, the wounds would take a lifetime to heal. But the necklace was fake, the lies had been real, and the truth belonged to me now. And no one, not Seraphine, not Helene, not Thaddeus, could take it from me again. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals come not from strangers, but from the people who claim to love us the most. What do we owe to a family that turns its back on the truth? This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your voice, even when no one else stands with you. What would you have done in Indira's place? Have you ever been betrayed by your own blood? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. More real-life stories of strength, survival, and silent battles are coming, and you won't want to miss them.